this year should be a merit for the health and success of the families of Regina Bas Yosef Ruvain and Yeshaya ben Yisrael, Benjamin Wolf ben Tzvi Hersh, and Baruch ben Benjamin Wolf. The Aliyas Neshama from this year. Well, I wanted to continue, but tonight and actually tomorrow is the Asar B'Tevis. And Asar B'Tevis really, in certain ways, based on a certain halacha, seems to be, in many ways, the most severe of all. There's an Avodrom that says, he is a early posek, that if Asar B'Tevis falls on Shabbos, you would have to fast on Shabbos. Now we know any fast day that falls on Shabbos is moved. It's called a nidche, it's moved to Sunday. But he brings down and he says that Asar B'Tevis is so severe that even if it fell on Shabbos, where obviously you're not supposed to fast, you would have to fast. And we can ask ourselves, why is that? Now we know Asar B'Tevis in general, what happened. That's the Asar B'Tevis really is when the beginning of the destruction of the temple, Beis Hamikdash, happened. That's what Asar B'Tevis is. If I recall correctly, the wall of Jerusalem was surrounded and that by the enemy, and that became the initial attempt by the Goyim to destroy the Beis Hamikdash. So that's historically what happened. Then, of course, it took time, and then finally, of course, on Tisha B'Av, it was destroyed, and so on. So the question is, why would something like Asar B'Tevis, why would that be so severe that if it happened on Shabbos, you'd still have to fast? That's unheard of in any other Tainus, fast day, which is rabbinical. We know, of course, that if it happened on Shabbos, if Yom Kippur happened on Shabbos, well, of course we know you have to fast. But that's because Yom Kippur is according to the Torah. But all the rabbinical fast days, which there are basically 4, right, you don't have to fast if it comes out on Shabbos. Even Tisha B'Av, if it calls out, like I said, if it falls out on Shabbos, you do not have to fast, right? You would move it to Sunday. So, like I said, the question is, why is Asar B'Tevis so much more severe than Tisha B'Av? Now, like I said, historically we know that that's when the beginning of the campaign to destroy the temple started. You see. Now, there is something that we do know, which I had mentioned, and that is that the mazel of Esav, or Edom, is several times a year. In other words, that's when he has a special power, Esav, to prosecute the Jewish people if they sin. So the mazel of Esav is very strong in Teves and half of Shvat until Tu B'Shvat. It's also very strong in Tammuz and the next month, or half of the month, which is Ov. So on Tu B'Shvat, the mazel of Esav ends, and that begins the mazel of Yosef, right, on Tu B'Shvat. And on Tammuz and half of Av, the mazel of Esav again is very strong, and it ends on Chamisha Oseh B'Ov, which is a very good day for the Jewish people. So that makes sense. That is, the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash occurs, or the beginning of the destruction occurs when? It occurs in Teves. So that's why. And obviously the Beis Hamikdash, right, is the main focus of Judaism. You see, that's where the Shekhinah, the divine presence, resides. So clearly then, there would be major kitrugim, which is, of course, prosecutions against the Jewish people in that month. So we understand the timing of this, of the concept of Asar B'Teves. You see. So that's in terms of when. But the question is, why is it so severe? What is interesting is that when you look at historically, that is the beginning of what? Of the campaign to destroy the Beis Hamikdash. You see. And that's, of course, where that was because of the sins of the Jews. But the meaning of the day really is something unique. We can ask, when was the Gezerah, when was the decree by God in the heavenly tribunal that the Beis Hamikdash would be destroyed? Well, what we realize is that decree happened on Asar B'Teves, because that was the beginning of the campaign. Therefore, that was the beginning of the decree. So it comes out that the real part of the Beis Hamikdash being destroyed, right, the most significant time is not only when it was destroyed, is when the Gezerah, the decree that it has to be destroyed, that's when it was issued. And therefore, the day of the decree is Asar B'Teves. You see. And therefore, that day is the most significant of all. Because when it's destroyed, it's just a matter of formality. Whenever, the Rabbi Shem, wants it to be destroyed. But the real destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, right, is not so much when it was destroyed, but when was the decree that it has to be destroyed issued. That's the worst day of all, you see. And it was destroyed, Chazal tell us, and so on. Because the Jews, there are different ideas. But the Jews sinned, whatever they sinned. They violated, apparently, the three sins for which one should give up one's life. And that is Avodah Zarah, idol worship. Kilei Arayos, incest, adultery. Right? And Retzicha, and murder. Those are the three sins for which one must give up his life if he is asked to commit. So the Jewish people violated those three sins. That's what the Gemara says. And therefore, it was decreed that the Beis Hamikdash should be destroyed. You see. So therefore, we now understand that when the decree is what's called promulgated or issued, is the real worst day of all. Not necessarily where the decree is fulfilled, but when the decree in heaven happens. And that's what happened at Asar B'Teves. Now, what's also interesting is that there is a Chazal that says that the decree to build the Beis Hamikdash, right, the decree to build the third Beis Hamikdash will also be issued on Asar B'Teves, right? Because that was the day that it was issued to be destroyed. So we can imagine that in heaven, right now, or tomorrow, whatever, that they are now talking about, well, do we want the third Beis Hamikdash to be built? And therefore the whole deliberations of the court is happening now, or tomorrow, whatever. So we certainly have to hope that the decree will be that the Beis Hamikdash has to be rebuilt. And when it will be rebuilt is merely a formality. The key is to get heaven to issue the decree that the Beis Hamikdash has to be built, generally in the year that the decree is issued. So what we have to hope is that the decree to build the third Beis Hamikdash is going to happen on Asar B'Teves, you see. And that's what we're hoping. Because the decree to rebuild will happen on the same day as the decree to destroy. So that's it. So let's hope that today or tomorrow, tonight now is Asar B'Teves, or tomorrow, that the heavenly tribunal or court will decide that the Jews have had enough of the Golus, right, the exile, right, and the tikkun process is almost complete in terms of the exile and the suffering, and therefore the Rebbe will decree that he wants the third Beis Hamikdash to be rebuilt. So let's hope that tomorrow we will actually witness that decree. Maybe something significant will happen, which is interesting, and so on, So these are the concepts of Asur B'Teves, you see, which would mean that Teves, which is the month of Edom or Esav, is going to be reversed, because that's what it means. If the Beis Hamikdash is decreed to be rebuilt in the month of Esav, well, that's the overturning of the power of Esav to rule. And we do see good signs. In Eretz Yisrael, we saw the beginning of a new government without any participation of the left, the radical left, the extremists, the progressives, the Erev Rav. They are not in the government at all. So that really, I think it was sworn in the month of Teves, which is last week, after Hanukkah. So that is a very good sign, you see. So that's number one. And number two, even in America, which is Edom or Esav, right, the Congress or the House of Representatives will take control, the Republicans, tomorrow on January 3rd, which is Asur B'Teves, you see. And hopefully that will mean that this will be the beginning of the end of the power of the Erev Rav of America, Esav, which is the evil of Esav, the Rasha Esav, that they will begin to lose power. So it is interesting that on Asur B'Teves is when the Congress begins, after the elections. I find that to be very interesting. And so on. So therefore, let's hope that we will see the rebuilding of the temple, the Beis Hamikdash, this year, you see, and that will effectively end the Golus. So tomorrow, really, in that sense, is really a very good day. You see. Great. Okay. There is a very interesting remez. Remez means an allusion, which I would like to share. At the end of Vayishlach, right, we are now in the story of Yosef, and in Egypt, the whole story of Yosef, which is a very difficult story to understand, which I'd like to talk a little about, and how it fits into the whole story, really, of Yaakov and Esav. What's the secret, the mystery, the hidden story of what's going on with Yaakov and Esav? But at the end of Parshas Vayishlach, it says there, Eila HaMelachim, these are the kings, Asher Molchu Be'eretz Edom, that reigned in the land of Edom, Esav. When did they reign? So the Torah continues and says, Lefnei Meloich Melech B'Yisrael, before there reigned a king in Israel, right? So in other words, the Torah is telling us it's now going to list, and it lists 8 of them, 8 kings. At the end of Parshas Vayishlach, these are the kings that emerged from Edom, Esav, right, in Haseir, before there reigned a Jewish king, a king in Israel. Now it's interesting because it says these are the kings, plural, whereas by Israel it says before there reigned a king, one, in Israel. So what the Torah is intimating, right, that in the end of time, before there reigned a king, who is the king? Because it says, right, Elah told us, Yaakov Yosef. In other words, before Yosef, or the Mashiach ben Yosef, will rule, right, then the worst part of Esav, there will be 8 kings. Now, what is interesting about that is that according to the Kabbalah, 7 of these kings are totally evil, bad people, very bad people. They're the classic, models of Esav himself, and they were bad. But the Zohar says, and that represents, by the way, 7 different levels of evil. It's called the Shivas HaKelim, the broken vessels. But I'm getting into that. And then the last king, his name was Hadar HaMelech. Hadar, his name was Hadar, and HaMelech, King Hadar. He was the 8th king. And the Zohar says, right, that by all the previous 7 kings of Edom mentioned in Torah, it says by each one of them, Vayomos. He reigned for whatever, and then he died. But by the 8th king, it doesn't say that he died. It doesn't say that. It says there reigned the 8th king, which was Hadar HaMelech, King Hadar, but it doesn't say Vayomos, and he died. Also, what's interesting is it mentions the wife of this person, Mehitavel, you see, and it doesn't do that by any of the other 7 kings. So, can we see a significance, right, of what the Torah is saying? Some secret. But what it seems to be connected to, it seems to be saying that before there reigns a king in Israel, and that's the next parsha of Yosef, which is Mashiach ben Yosef, there will reign 8 kings in Edom. And the last king, like I said, doesn't say Vayomas, right? And that is because the 8th king will reverse the evil of the 7. That's why it doesn't say Vayomas, and he died. Almost as if the 8th king lives on, you see, because Hadar Mahader in Hebrew means to reverse. Because Hadar HaMelech, King Hadar, reverses the evil of the 7. So the first 7 are evil, and the last one, Hadar HaMelech, right, is the 8th king, and he reverses the evil of the 7. You see. So that's what the Zohar says, you see. And what is interesting is when the Soviet Union collapsed on December 25th, I think 1990, if I remember correctly, or was it 91, whatever. I was wondering, what is the significance of this, that 7 kings of Edom, right, they reign and they're evil. But the 8th king, Hadar HaMelech, reverses the evil of the 7. I was thinking that to myself. I mean, Kabbalistically, we know what the Zohar says, and so on, that there are 7 kings of Edom that are evil, and the 8th king is not, and that alludes to a Kabbalistic phenomenon called the Shiur HaKelim, the breaking of the vessels. In any case, so I was wondering, what could be the significance of that? And then what's interesting is the Rebbe Shem, I was on the subway then, and the Rebbe Shem had the New York Times, and somebody had read the New York Times and left it on the bench. So, I was on the train, so what I did is I picked up the paper just to look at it, the New York Times, of that day. So it would be interesting to see what some of the news is. And one of the main news, well, of course, was that the previous day, Gorbachev resigned, right? That was December 25th, 1990, I think. He resigned, you see. And that was the previous day. So, therefore, what happened was the New York Times went through all the different, I think they call them secretaries, whatever. They're really prime ministers. They're the heads of Russia, of the entire communist regime of Russia. And lo and behold, it was astounding. The first, let's call him secretary or prime minister of Russia, remember, they're all communists, was a guy called Lenin. We all heard of Lenin. So he was the first let's call him Prime Minister of Russia, the head of Russia, president, whatever. The second one was Stalin. So that's number 2. Very bad people. The third one, in 1953, I think it was, after Stalin died, was a guy called Malenkov. So that is number 3. Then the fourth one who became famous, his name is Khrushchev. I don't know if you remember Khrushchev, but he was quite loud and very dramatic and so on. But in any case, he was the fourth prime minister of Russia. And they were all very bad people, Khrushchev. Now the fifth one, if I remember correctly, was Brezhnev. Bad person. All of them. Right? So that's the fifth. The sixth one, right, was, I think it was either Andropov or Chernenko. Which one I don't remember, but let's assume it was Chernenko. He was the sixth. The seventh one was a guy, Andropov, right? So there you are. 7 prime ministers of Russia that are incredibly evil. I mean, we all know that. But who's the 8th? All right? And that 8th would correspond to the 8th king of Edom. His name is Gorbachev, who, by the way, just recently died. Gorbachev was the 8th prime minister from Lenin, which is when the Bolsheviks, when communism took over in 1918 or 17, whenever it was, right? So it comes out that Gorbachev is the 8th president or whatever of Russia. What did Gorbachev do? He reversed the evil of Russia. Now, that was incredible. If you remember, they issued in 1987 or 86 the concept of glasnost and perestroika, where all of a sudden Gorbachev reversed the decrees and he said that Russia can become a much greater open society. And that led in the beginning of freedom and liberty to the Russian people. Now, he was the 8th president of Russia, right? And therefore, he corresponds, therefore, if Russia, and I'll point out why, if he corresponds to Hadar HaMelech, who is the 8th king. But the Zohar says that Hadar HaMelech reversed the evil of the 7. So isn't that incredible? You see? So this is what we see, a tremendous remez. Now, was I right? Does Gorbachev correspond to Hadar HaMelech? You see, as the person who reverses the evil, right, of the 7 kings before him. And therefore, what that means is shortly thereafter, there has to be the king in Israel, which is Mashiach ben Yosef. You see, that would be very, very interesting, you see. So, what I did is I asked somebody who was very good in gematria, numerical values of different words. So he's very good at it. So I asked him, is there an allusion in gematria of this Hadar HaMelech to Gorbachev? Right? That would be incredible, wouldn't it? Right? That's what's called bingo. So he comes back to me and he says, by the way, the numerical value, right, of Gorbachev, right, I think it's 303, how you spell it in Hebrew. The numerical value of Hadar HaMelech, right, is 304. Now in Gematria, you're allowed to add an extra 1 for the word itself. So besides the fact that each letter has a value, right, the word itself counts as 1 that can be added to the Gematria. So it comes out, I think, that the Gematria is 303, add a 1 to the, it comes out to 304. But 304 is the Gematria of Hadar HaMelech. Bingo! That means the name of Gorbachev is alluded to in this individual in the Torah that's written 3,300 years ago, right, of Hadar HaMelech. Now that's astounding. Absolutely astounding. Now why would Russia be, or the concept of communism, of the Soviet Union, why would that be in the Torah? Because if you recall, I said that Edom, or Esav, had three characteristics, right? The first characteristic was what? Is that he's a tremendous deceiver, imposter, merama bepeh, deceiver. Esav was also a tremendous baltaiva. It's another very famous characteristic. And the third characteristic of Esav, right, is that he's also a tremendous balgaiva. Says, Vayives Esav es ha-bechira, and Esav despised the birthright, you see, which is the whole issue of spirituality in a family. So he despised it, you see. So therefore, Esav or Edom had three characteristics. Therefore, Esav, we know, became Edom, the Edomites. Edom became Rome. That's what the Gemara says. Edom zu Romi. Edom is Rome, right? The Torah says Esav is Edom. The Gemara says Edom is Rome, right? Because Rome, of course, is Esav, Italy, and so on. And then we know that Esav also, that Rome became Western civilization, or I should say Christianity. Christianity took over the heritage of Esav, you see. And then we know that today Western civilization is the bearer of Christianity. Now, therefore, Esav, which has three characteristics, is divided in three sections of Western civilization. The worst part of Esav, or the worst part of Western civilization, is the Soviet Union under communism. Unbelievable Bali Gaiva, arrogant, incredible, atheist, and so on. So therefore, the Soviet Union, Russia, is the worst part of Edom, right? And originally they were Christian, the Russian Orthodox Church, but then they became communists. So Esav, the third part of Esav, or the worst part, is the Soviet Union, right? And what is fascinating is that the Soviet Union collapsed. Gorbachev closed it politically on December 25th, which we know is Christmas, which they celebrate as the birth, right, of their person that they worship and so on. So that's astounding. So Gorbachev closed that country. He nullified the whole Soviet Union, right, in December 25th. That's when it happened, to indicate that this is the beginning of the fall of Esav, which is exactly what the Torah says. You see, now the second part of Esav, I mentioned, of Christianity, Western civilization, is Europe. Because Europeans, right, the whole concept of Europe and Christianity is fraudulent. Because they have killed more people in the name of their religion, I think, than all wars combined. You see, Christianity is a conquering religion. In many ways, it's brutal, the way they used to take over the world and subject people to torture and horrors. I mean, just take a look at the Crusades and so on, the pogroms and the Spanish Inquisitions, right? All fueled by Christianity as a religion and so on. I mean, they're known for this and so on, you see. So Europe is the second part of Esav, which is the fraudulent aspect, where they preach love and peace, and they kill everybody, especially for 2,000 years they've been killing people. And then you have, of course, America, which is the last part of Esav, and that represents the taiva, the pleasure, and that's really what America is, and so on. Therefore, what the Torah seems to be alluding to, or in a certain sense prophesying, right, is that when the last part of Esav collapses, right, and that is when Hadar HaMelech, the eighth king of Esav or Edom, takes over, he will reverse the evil of the seven, which is exactly what Gorbachev did. He terminated the Soviet Union politically, right? So that ended, in many ways, the worst part of Esav. And this will happen, this will precede the beginning of Mashiach ben Yosef. You see, it's fascinating. That's exactly what we see, right, in this allusion in the Torah. This is all in the Torah that was written, right, 3,300 years ago. You see. Anyway, I wanted to share that with you, that this is alluded to in the Torah in the end of Parshas Vayishlach, before the whole story of Yosef. You see. Now, what is important to know about this in the story of Yosef is certain ideas. You know, look, Yosef didn't have to be kidnapped. He could have gone down, you know, it could have been a whole different storyline. But the whole concept of Jews kidnapping another Jew, all right, because of his dreams, and then they sell him into slavery, right? And he winds up in the house of Potiphar. Then he has an entire, you know, test situation, temptation with Potiphar's wife, and so on. And then he interprets the dream of Paroi, right? And all of a sudden he becomes Grand Vizier. It is incredible. It's hard. It's like it's a classic, almost, you know, like a Hollywood movie. It has all the drama, the mystery, the intrigue of that type of situation. How do we understand it within the hidden story of the Torah itself? You see. And therefore, one of the questions that you have to ask is, why does Yosef have to be kidnapped in that sense, you see? Why did Rabbi Shem, clearly what the Rabbi Shem wanted to do is conceal where Yosef was in the mind of Yaakov. Yaakov didn't know where Yosef was. As far as he was concerned, right, the brothers told him that Yosef died. He was killed by an animal, right? And they dipped his clothing, the coat, in blood, and they showed it to Yaakov, and they said, do you recognize this? And he realized, or at least he thought, that yes, it's Yosef's coat, and it's in blood, so he must have been killed by an animal. The question is, why did the Moshe want Yaakov Avinu not to know where Yosef was, to think that he died, and therefore to grieve over Yosef for 22 years, because that's when he first came to Egypt to meet Yosef again. That is the question, you see. And the truth is that the idea of that is a very important idea, something that actually I had mentioned last week, and that is that it says in the Torah, you know, and Elah told us Yaakov, Yosef, and so on, and Vayeshev Yaakov, and Jacob dwelt, and the Chazal tell us that Yaakov was sort of like tired. He wanted to just live a peaceful life after this. I mean, he had a lot of problems, right? With Esav, his brother, and Dinah, and Shechem, and now Yosef is gone, and so on. He had a lot of problems, right? And he wanted to, I hate to use the word relax, but he just wanted to take it easy. The very difficult thing to understand is, what do you mean? Tzaddikim don't take it easy. Tzaddikim don't go on vacation in that sense, where, you know, it's one thing you want to, you know, for a week or two go to a hotel just to relax, refresh yourself, and get back into, you know, doing mitzvahs and so on. But Yaakov wanted to do it for the rest of his life. So the Rebbe says, what do you mean? You can't take off. You want to relax? That'll come in Olam Haba, the future world. This world is a world of work, right? Where you have to be involved in tikkun. Can't relax and take a vacation, which is really, you know, retire for the rest of your life. And that, what that did is it brought on the whole problem of Yosef, the entire drama of Yosef. So our question is, right, which we have to ask, how could Yaakov think this way? A tzaddik doesn't take off for the rest of his life and relax. Imagine walking over to a Hasidic Rebbe and the Rebbe says, well, I want to take off. I want to relax for the rest of my life. Right? I'm giving up the what's called the Rebista, the whole, Hasidic court, the court and so on, right? We don't hear that kind of things. Of course not. So why would Yaakov Avinu, who was much greater, right, obviously than Hasidic Rebbes, how could he say this? That's a very difficult thing to understand. It's true that he had a lot of tsaros, but still, right, Tzaddikim don't say that because they know that this is a world of work. So what was really Yaakov alluding to? Well, the truth is very interesting. And I had mentioned some of the ideas last week. But to be again familiar, we know in a very short summary, right, that there are 4 of us. We know that, right? And the 4 of us is Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and Esav. That all 4 were patriarchs, and each one had a mission. The problem was, and I mentioned Yaakov's mission was to bring down Kedusha, which is Yoshiv Holam, right? And the work of Esav as a patriarch, was to go into the field, right? Ish Sodeh, and to subdue evil and destroy the Satan, to remain righteous, even in a world filled with Tumah. The problem was Esav succumbed to the temptations of the Satan, and he became evil, which we know. So Yaakov took over the job of Esav, which we know also, right, in order to complete the job of the 4th of. But over, you see. And therefore he had to go into the field. He had to leave the Beis Medrash, so to speak, and go into the field, which is the house of Lavan, and remain a tzaddik in the house of Lavan, because he took over the job of Esav, and that was Esav's job, an Isoda, a man of the field. Now we know this, you see. Now then we know that Esav, that Yaakov had an opportunity to bring Esav back, which I explained, last week or whatever, that Esav could have done tshuva, but for whatever reason Yaakov missed that indication that he could have done tshuva, and he didn't offer him Dinah, which I had mentioned last week, and therefore Esav returned Ladarkoi to his evil ways. He spoke about that. However, right, there was a problem, that even though Yaakov took over the job of Esav, right, and he actually completed it, it seemed that way, but not really. Because there remained a major problem in the avodah of Yaakov vis-a-vis his taking over the job of Esav. What was that? Now we know that he was going to meet Esav, right? He was coming with 400 people, men, to kill him. And he was very worried. And it says, Vayiru Yaakov me'oid. And Yaakov was tremendously afraid. Why? Because what he was afraid of isn't the prowess of Esav. No. He was afraid of the spiritual superiority of Esav in the area of kibbud of, honoring your father and mother. Because Esav remained home, right? And he honored his father and mother, and he served them. Yaakov, however, didn't, because he was in the house of Lavan. So what is we don't know exactly how, but therefore he was denied, in a certain sense, the opportunity, or maybe he never visited him. We don't really know. That Yaakov was deficient in the mitzvah of kibbud of vis-a-vis Esav. Esav had a much greater merit than Yaakov in that area. But that's very bad, because Yaakov Avinu's job is to do what? Is to take over the job of Esav, right? And therefore to establish incredible superiority over Esav. Instead, Esav now has a tremendous superiority over Yaakov, that he honored his father, right, much greater than Yaakov Avinu. In fact, Chazal tell us that Esav was the greatest person who ever lived in terms of honoring his father and mother. Certainly his father, you see. So the problem was that even though Yaakov is now coming to meet Esav, and he completed the job of Esav, right, by entering into the field of Tumah and remaining righteous and tremendously subduing the Satan, which, by the way, is the angel that he fought with before he's meeting Esav. Even though he did that, but he left Esav with a tremendous credit of kibbud of over him. And that flaw would be very difficult for Jews to overcome. That would always enable Esav to be victorious in judgment between him and Yaakov. Because he could always say, they don't come to my kibbud of at all. Right? So I should win this court case in heaven. And what the Bansham knew, of course, is that can't be. He cannot leave Esav with that type of superior merit over Yaakov. And Yaakov himself was tremendously afraid that maybe he would win in court, and the court would decide that he can kill Yaakov Avinu or seriously injure him. And that's why Yaakov was afraid. And actually the Targum says that. Why was Yaakov afraid? So he says, Mishum Yukro de Avuah, because honoring your father. That's why, you see. See, here was the problem. Yaakov had done tremendous in completing the job of Esav. The problem was that since he was not home, whatever, Esav had this incredible superior merit over Yaakov that would always be a thorn in the side not only of Yaakov, but in all the Jewish descendants, because it would give Esav's descendants a superiority over the children of Yaakov, which is very bad. You see, once we understand all of this, we now understand something very important, where it says Vayoshav or Vayeshev, and Esav wanted, and Yaakov wanted to retire. What does that mean? Of course, he didn't want to retire. Tzaddikim don't retire. But what he wanted to do is, in his mind, he had completed the job of Esav. So he wanted to retire from the job of Esav and go back to his own job of Kedusha, of bringing down holiness. But of course he had to continue the Avodah itself. You see, that's what he was thinking. He wanted to retire from the job of Esav, right? Which is the Kfiyah Surah, to subdue evil by remaining righteous. And he was right, you see. Especially since the job of Esav would now be given, or half of it would be given to Yosef, which I mentioned, you see. But in any case, that's what he wanted to do, is to end the job of taking over the job of Esav and going back to his own job in Avodah, in worshiping God with mitzvahs and so on, in terms of his Pashtus Kedusha, to bring down holiness, Yosef Yeholam, to remain in the tent. That's what he wanted to do, because he thought that he completed the job of Esav. What else is there to do? You see. And as we will see, for the part that he did not complete, because like once said, that no man can do two jobs of two patriarchs. So Yaakov only did half, but he completed his half. And the other half he would give out to Yosef to finish the job of Esav. But he certainly completed his half, you see. That's what he wanted. But the Rabbi Shalom said, no, because you left Esav with a tremendous merit over you and your descendants. You need to repair that. You see, how did he repair that? Because the Rabbi Shalom decided that Yosef, who does take over the job of Esav, because Yosef now becomes a Chatziov, he becomes a half a patriarch, he has to go into what's called a Klippa. He has to go into the evil field. Yosef has to go and become the Ish Sodeh, the man of the field. That's why Yosef had to go to Egypt, to remain a tzaddik in the Tumah of Egypt. Same thing as Yaakov did by Lavan, you see. But the main idea is that the Bansham could have made it, right, where Yosef went to Egypt, remain, because let's say he was offered, for whatever historical reason, some type of become the Grand Vizier. I mean, it doesn't take much for the Bansham to arrange that. It takes nothing at all. And Yaakov would have known that Yosef was down in Egypt, and he was doing a fabulous job. But the Bansham said, no, you need a kapora. You need a atonement. Because Esav has a much greater merit in honoring father, which is a terrible detriment to the Jewish people. Therefore, what the Bansham is incredible. He had Yosef in Egypt doing the job of Esav without Yaakov knowing it, because Yaakov thought Yosef was dead, destroyed or killed by an animal. And that was for 22 years. So for the 22 years that he did not serve his father, he was denied the service of Yosef. You see? That was the sacrifice that he had to do, which is interesting. You see what the Bansham does? Not only does he have to give the opportunity of Klal Yisrael to do the tikkun, but he has to make sure that they're protected. And Esav had this tremendous advantage over Yaakov and his descendants, right? That he honored his father. And Yaakov didn't do anywhere near what Esav did. So in order to protect the Jewish people, right, from the kitrugim, the prosecutions of Edom or Esav, or the Sultan, who was the angel of Esav, all right, he had to make sure Yaakov had a kapara. So what he did is he made the story, he caused Yosef's travel to Egypt to be concealed from Yaakov, right? And as a result, the pain or the grief that Yaakov had, that Yosef was not there, and therefore Yosef was denied serving his father for 22 years, was sufficient to remove, right, the disadvantage that Yaakov had. In fact, what's interesting, we see that when Yaakov was apprised of the fact that Yosef was alive, it says, good, let me go to Egypt before I die to see Yosef. You see, so it says that before he left to go to Egypt, he sacrificed on an altar, right? He said he sacrificed Lelokei Oviv, to the God of his father. Why didn't he say to the God of Avraham Avinu, his grandfather? Because what he realized is the reason why God concealed the fate of Yosef from him was to allow him to have a kapara from the fact that he did not serve his father for 22 years. So he immediately made up for that by offering a sacrifice to God. God in terms of what? God in terms of that this is God of his father Yitzchak. And that in some way will invoke a tremendous merit for Yitzchak, you see. And that we understand. And we now understand in this week's Parsha, in Vayechi. You see, what do you mean? Because it says Vayechi Yaakov. And Yaakov lived, right? We know in the land of Egypt for 17 years. It uses the word Vayechi. Well, it really should, and then he died, and so on, which is what the Parsha talks about. But what it really should have said is Vayeshev Yaakov, and Yaakov dwelt in Egypt, right, for 17 years, right? What do you mean Vayechi Yaakov, and Yaakov lived? And the answer is that once Yaakov realized that God afforded him, even though it was terrible grief, a kapara for the kibbur of aim that he did not do it to his father, therefore he realized that he now completed totally the job of Esav, which it took over when Esav became a Rasha. So that was the tikkun that he did. You see? And therefore he lived. Why? Because he completed something which was incredibly difficult, to go into what's called the tumah, right? And survive and remain righteous. And therefore it doesn't say that he dwelt in Egypt. He lived in Egypt with the idea that he successfully did what? That he successfully did the tikkun of Esav's job. You see, he completed truly completed the job of Esav, because now Esav doesn't even have any merit of superiority over the fact that he was greater in kibbud over aim. Because what God gave Yaakov Avinu is a tremendous concept, is a tremendous kapora. So now Esav does not have that as a claim against Yaakov. He does have it, however, as a merit for himself and for his descendants. And who knows if that's not basically one of the ideas of why the descendants of Esav rule the entire world. You see? Because that's what it is. When a person observes the mitzvah of kibbud ov, they submit to the authority, the beliefs, the tradition of their father, their parents, father and mother. You see? So the reward of that, among other things, is that since you submitted to the authority, right, of your parents, which is the mitzvah of kibbud over aim, right, therefore you will be an authority over others. You see, that's the measure for measure. You who admit to the authority and thereby honor your father and mother, right, for that authority, you therefore will be rewarded that you yourself will become an authority over others. So who knows if the fact that Esav did tremendous kibbud ov, right, and that's what gave Rome the tremendous merit to rule the entire world, because of the merit of Esav as regards kibbud ov, honoring your father and mother. It's interesting because even the fact that Rome ruled, right, for so many hundreds of years. I mean, Rome became a republic in 525, right, BCE. That's a long time. That's when they first became a republic, 525 BCE, and they collapsed basically around 400 CE. We're looking here at almost 900 years of existence. Who knows if that the real reason for that is because Esav was so great in kibbud ov. You see, and that's why Rome ruled the world for 1,000 years. However, the Rosh Hashanah had to take that merit at least away from Esav in terms of him being tremendously superior to Yaakov. In fact, we see how superior it was, that Yaakov was afraid when he's about to meet Esav, that Esav may have the merit to actually harm him or kill him. We can imagine. So look what the Rabbi did. You see? To save Yaakov and his descendants, he had to make sure that Yaakov would complete the entire job, even if it meant that he would have to take Yosef, right, and hide the fact that Yosef was still alive. But Yaakov wouldn't know that. Imagine he loved Yosef, as the Torah says, more than, it's hard to say, but more than the other children or whatever. But certainly his grief was enormous. In fact, he never really got over the grief of the death of Yosef. We see from the Torah that. So that all was a kapora for Yaakov Avinu. So one of the things we can learn from this is how God takes care of the Jewish people. That he's very careful, because he knows, you know, what the results will be, what the consequences are, if evil people, Rishoim, like Esav, actually have a complaint, right, where they say, well, I'm superior to you in spirituality. That's very dangerous, you see, because in the end, that's the critical factor, spirituality. Not if you have more weapons or if you train better. All of this is irrelevant. It's what is your merit in front of me, God says. Problem is, like I said, Esav had tremendous merit, you see, and therefore he had to protect Yaakov and all his descendants. So, let's hope. So this really begins to shape up the story of Yaakov and Esav, why in many ways this had to take place in order for Yaakov to really complete his part in the job of Esav the job of Esav himself. However, there are many other ideas which are very difficult, which I will explain, hopefully next week. Any questions?
I have a question.
Okay.
So this is really interesting about the merits. Remember once, Rabbi, you said that America has a lot of merits for Mother's Day and Father's Day?
Right.
Are those that you said that one time you were saying something like America could be punished as a country, but do the merits go to Esav or to the country?
Well, remember, America in many ways is a descendant, one of the descendants of Esav. In that sense, it's certainly the philosophy of America. And a lot of it has to do with what America does. Because America does a tremendous amount of chesed, tremendous acts of kindness, you see. So they have tremendous spiritual claims, you see. So that's certainly true.
Right, so then America still has merits to stand, maybe.
Oh, yeah. Sure they do. Yeah, America has hundreds of years of merits. Not only that, one of the greatest merits of America is Torah is learned in America. Freedom.
Right, that's huge.
Jews can learn Torah in America, which is incredible. It's not just the chesed, but a great deal of the Torah that the Jews learn in America, right, freedom of religion, is a tremendous merit to America. You see. So God takes all of that into account.
Also, when you were
that?
talking about when Yosef knew that he did the tikkun of Esav, do we have a way?
You mean Yaakov?
Yosef completed it, right? He completed the.
He had the second part.
He completed the tikkun, right?
Right.
But he knew, and we don't do we have a way to know if we've completed a tikkun?
Do we have a way? Maybe. Yeah, maybe God in some way gives that message to a person, but he has to be able to read it. But God will always make sure that you complete your tikkun, because he wants to give you olam haba, which means you have to finish your job.
Even
and if you don't finish, you come back. What was that? Yeah.
I was going to say, even if that means coming back.
Right, exactly. Sure. So we see that the whole story in many ways is not, arbitrary. Everything is there for a reason in order to help the Jews do the tikkun. You see. Very important story in terms of how the creation runs. People don't realize how pivotal the story of Yaakov and Esav is, and how much it influences world history. Just take a look at like I said, Gorbachev, what the Torah says about that, because the Soviet Union is really from Esav.
So maybe when you said Edom Suromi, it became Christianity?
Yes, Rome became Christian.
Do you think, because the queen passed away and now the Pope passed away, do you think that in any way that's connected to something happening?
Yes. Yeah, right. Yeah, he was 95 years old. Benedict died, which is, look, the Pope is the king of Christianity. He's the prince of whatever you call that, of Christianity, yeah. And, he rules instead of, their person.
But he was a retired Pope. He was retired, though.
He was retired, yeah. I think because of a scandal.
Yeah, because
he was forced to retire, right.
He was still living in the Vatican.
Yeah,
So he was like pseudo.
Yeah, it's like Moshe was a Canaan. That's where they put their old poets to
old age home.
Old age home, right? Yeah.
You're not talking loud enough.
Can you go back a little bit? In the very beginning, you were talking about a Sarabatevet.
Right.
In such a way, like it sounds like it's the most. I've heard it before where people say, "Well, it's like a little fast," and then that's why we don't have to start the fast at
that's
night.
Why I brought
we can
down.
Start it tomorrow.
Right. That's why. No. So all fast days are not the whole day except Tisha B'Av. But it's a very significant fact, like I said.
But I don't think that it's really talked about as being as significant as you just made it.
Okay.
It sounds like this is really something special.
What?
We should really be crying tomorrow.
Yeah, because that's
now.
when the decree was issued by the court, the heavenly tribunal, to destroy the temple. Yeah, that's terrible.
Right.
That's
so right now
day.
They're basically adjudicating, right, to see if
exactly.
If we have the merit.
Right. That's why we have to hope that finally they're going to say, okay, we're going to build the Beis Hamikdash, because if they do say that, it's going to happen this year. Because we know the judgment isn't if, it's when.
But wouldn't Mashiach ben Yosef be in the picture already before they make that decree?
Right.
He's
that
not
means
in
this
the picture.
year. Well, we don't know. I mean, he would know. But in other words, what I'm saying is that it's not a matter of if they will give the decree. We know they will eventually give the decree that the Beis Hamikdash has to be built, because it's part of his entry as Mashiach. The question is when. So what we're hoping is that tomorrow, which is Asur B'Tevis in the daytime, that will be the decree, right, to build the Beis Hamikdash, which is automatically the decree that it will happen this year, which is also automatically the decree that we will now prepare Sheikh ben Yosef, right?
When you say it's his entry into to be the Mashiach, what do you mean by that? Because in what level of form of Mashiach that we would see it with our eyes? Meaning, doesn't he have to have somewhat of a popularity before the Beit HaMikdash would come even down?
Yes.
And don't they say that it comes down on Tisha B'Av? So you're saying...
Well, like I say, it's not... What we need is the decree. And that can happen tomorrow. When it comes down is the actual fulfillment of that decree. But the real concept is the decree itself. You see? Because then it happens. Without that decree, it doesn't happen. You see? So what we're hoping is tomorrow is the decree that the Beis Hamikdash will be built this year, and the Mashiach ben Yosef will be freed from his klipa, his prison, or the suffering that he goes through, right, in order to allow the Jewish people to be redeemed. The end of the exile. That's what we're hoping.
So for me,
what?
I just want to understand it correctly. So in order for the Mashiach, for him to start the actual process, we need the decree of the Beit HaMikdash to be rebuilt first?
Well, it could be together.
But it doesn't need to be, because I always thought that it was Mashiach ben Yosef first, and then the decree for it to be rebuilt.
No, because once you release the Mashiach ben Yosef from his difficulties and his sufferings, that automatically means that the Beis Hamikdash will be built. Because the Beis Hamikdash has to be built before Mashiach ben David.
Right.
So it's automatically in the same decree. What basically the decree is that the exile will end this year. That's basically what it must mean. So if the exile ends, it implies two things. One is that the Mashiach ben Yosef will be released from his suffering. And number two, that the Beis Hamikdash must be built. Because that has to happen before Mashiach ben David comes.
And when, let's say the decree is issued, God willing, it has to happen this year in order for it to come into fruition, or it could happen next year? It has to be this year.
I believe it has to be this year, right? Right. And I believe that's why we're seeing... What? I can't hear you. What?
I want to know, is it Avraham Avinu's yard site tomorrow?
I don't know.
Not sure.
I think it was a few days ago.
It was a few days ago?
I think it was Friday.
Okay, talk louder, Rachel.
Number two, he can't hear me. Number two, about that Gorbachev, this Hadar, so now we got rid of all the bad leaders. Is now the new one, the good one, coming out? Like, I'm a little lost with that story.
Well, the main idea in that is that before Mashiach ben Yosef comes, these events must take place, where the Soviet Union must collapse. Because the Soviet Union is the worst aspect of Esav, you see. And what is fascinating is that the 8 kings of Edom is represented by the Soviet Union, who had 8 presidents. And the incredible thing is that Gorbachev is the gematria of Hadar HaMelech. You see.
Isn't Biden taking over the evil of Russia?
I can't hear you. What?
Biden is taking over the evil of Esav.
Biden
Yes.
is taking over.
Yes. Yeah. Because we are now witnessing a battle between the good part of Esav, which is Trump, and the bad part of Esav, which is the Democratic Party. Biden is merely a member of the Democratic Party. But the real evil of Esav are the progressives, the Democratic Party, the liberals. They are destroying the world. And hopefully, tomorrow, when the new Congress takes over, especially the House, the Republicans, they will go after all of them. And it's very possible they may destroy Biden. Because if they find that he took money from China as bribes, that's treason, not merely impeachment. It's a charge of treason. So it should be very interesting to see what God does to Biden.
So
what Biden is doing is beyond belief. The horror of Biden is beyond belief. And the incredible thing is nobody says anything. Thousands of people die every day because of that man. With fentanyl coming in over the border, and the amount of misery that he has caused America is beyond belief. I saw a statistic that 70% of America now regard themselves as poor. They can't make ends meet. You know? And the one who caused all this is Biden. Him and the Democrats.
You think tomorrow is there's a very big, not coincidence, but a very big connection between Asara B'Tevet and January 3rd, that they both, that it both falls on the same time when the shift in power?
Yes, I think that's really, in many ways, it looks coincidental, but it's not. There's a tremendous, like I say, shift in power, right, on Asara B'Tevet, which is hopefully the decree of the shift of power, right? So tomorrow could be incredibly significant. Incredibly significant. You know.
Rabbi, you were in the middle of a sentence, and then I think
what sentence was I in?
You were in the middle of talking about having the decree for the Beit HaMikdash, and then you said that I believe it's why we are seeing
I believe that we are seeing... Oh, maybe I would want to say that. That's why there are two very good things that are turning around. One is that, like I said, Israel now has no Erev Rav in the government. None, except Netanyahu, who is Erev Rav, but he's Erev Rav light. He's a much milder form of the Erev Rav. But basically, everybody else in the coalition is not the Erev Rav. It's on the contrary. It's a religious right. That's the first thing. So this never happened before in Israeli history, especially with a guy, Ben Gvir. Ben Gvir could be somebody that we don't even begin to think about who he is. And I suspect, you never know, he may become prime minister. Because the Rebbe Shem needs somebody between now and the Mashiach ben Yosef to be over Israel. He needs a middleman. But the middleman has to be a prime minister that is religious. And it's very possible, even though people will not probably agree, but that's because they don't really understand, you never know. It could be Ben Gvir. Because it has nothing to do with votes. It's all about God. And Ben Gvir can be a candidate to become prime minister. And if he does become prime minister, then I believe after him is Mashiach ben Yosef. You see?
Does he have to rule his full term?
Who? Ben Gvir?
Yeah, meaning you say...
No. No, it's possible that if he ever becomes prime minister, it could very well be. It's not up to the votes, it's up to God. He would be the perfect candidate to be what's called the middle, the interlude between the Erev Rav and the Mashiach ben Yosef.
When do they pick their prime minister?
Well, the elections won't be for another 4 years. But look, the Rebbe Shem has his ways. He has his ways of making anybody he wants to be prime minister, believe me.
Right. So now I have a question. If the decree is reversed tomorrow, and
yes,
we do get to be able to rebuild the Beit HaMikdash, God willing, this year, how do we know it'll be reversed? By looking in the news? By looking what's happening in the world? Like, how do we know?
Well, we'll know because it happened. We'll know because the Beit HaMikdash all of a sudden is being built or is coming down from heaven. And there will be an individual who will become very popular, Mashiach ben Yosef. Once he's released from his so-called prison, then that's it. He will become very well known, and he will have incredible abilities, to change the world. That's what the Rebbe Shem says.
So it would still take time, bottom line.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, I mentioned the Zohar many times, that 210 years before the end is 2240, the English year 2240. 210 years is what? Is 2030. Well, guess what? We just turned 23. We have 7 years. We have 7 years before Tchias HaMesim. So Mashiach ben Yosef, the Beit HaMikdash, and Mashiach ben David all have to come in 7 years.
So if tomorrow it's decreed in Shemaim, okay, let's build the Beit HaMikdash, you think that we're going to be redeemed this Passover?
It could be. Could be that something significant will happen Purim, right, and Pesach.
Why Purim?
Look, this year is going to become a very interesting year because of these two major events: the government of Israel and the government of the United States. You see, those are major events. Yeah, what?
Why Purim? I'm curious.
I can't hear you. What?
Why Purim? Why would we see something on Purim?
Well, because Purim is the destruction of Amalek. So that's the end of the Golus. That's what it signifies. You see. So Purim is a very appropriate time. And Adar, anyway, is the Mazel of Yosef.
Right.
So it's an appropriate time, very appropriate time. You know? Do you know when the Iraqi war ended? I mean, with Saddam Hussein? Do you know when the war ended? On Purim.
Right. On Purim.
I'll never forget that. The truce was declared on Purim, on the day of Purim itself. You know, so there's no question that it's a very propitious time for different events to happen. You see.
Oh.
Okay,
so Rabbi,
let's see.
The kavanah that we should have, should we do the Tehillim 79 and 137?
Yeah, sure.
Should we do it tonight? We should start them tonight. Is
well,
there
certainly,
anything else?
You can do it tonight because it's Tasor B'Tevis now, or you can do it tomorrow morning.
Well, how many times repeat what we have to say again?
What do you say? You say Perek 7, 8, and 9, and Perek 130?
79 and 137.
137.
Yeah.
The Tikkun Leah.
Oh, got it. Okay, very nice.
Is it better to say it when we're fasting?
Yeah, because that's the time that you're doing tshuva, right? Okay, it's going to be an exciting year. So I told you a lot of stuff, and you now see how the Rebbe takes very good care of Klal Yisrael.